The number over the boy's head read 94%, and Corin Ledger did not so much as blink. He had learned a long time ago, longer than his papers claimed, though nobody ever asked about that the worst thing an insurance agent could do at a moment like this was flinch. Flinching told the client something was wrong. Flinching invited questions. Questions invited refunds. And Corin Ledger did not do refunds. "Master Aldous Penn," he said, reading the name off the intake form in a voice as flat and pressed as a tax ledger. "You are renewing policy 1147-C for the Red Fang Ravine expedition, departing at dawn, 6-man party. Target, a suspected ashback worm nesting site." He turned the page. "I want to be transparent with you, as required under Clause 9 of the Adventurers Mutual Indemnity Charter. Your combined risk profile for this expedition, given your equipment, party composition, and the worm's confirmed brood defense behavior, sits at 94%. Aldous Penn, 26 years old, third-rank blade, a scar over one eyebrow he liked to say came from a manticore and had actually come from a bar fight, went the colour of old parchment. 90... You're telling me I've got a 6% chance of walking out of that ravine? I am telling you that you have a 94% chance of a fatal or near-fatal incident within the specified time window. Yes. Corin did not look up from the form. He was already filling in the premium calculation, his pen moving in short, economical strokes, each stroke the sound of a man doing arithmetic instead of grieving in advance on someone else's behalf. The Guild Underwriting Office, as you know, does not currently offer risk-adjusted quotes. They will sell you a policy at the standard adventurer's rate regardless of your true exposure, because they have no way of knowing your true exposure. I do. That is the entire difference between their product and mine. So what? What do I do? You have several options. Corin set down the pen and folded his hands. The exact posture a man uses when he is about to say something he has said many, many times before and has stopped finding difficult. Option 1. You do not go to Red Fang Ravine. Your risk profile immediately falls to a background rate of roughly 1% per month, standard for a resident of this city. Option 2. You go, at reduced party strength or altered equipment loadout, which I can model for you at an additional consulting fee, and which may reduce your exposure to a range I would consider commercially insurable. Option 3. You go as currently planned, in which case I am obligated to inform you that I cannot in good conscience issue you a policy, because I would be pricing a product I know in advance will pay out, which is not insurance. It is a wager I have already won. I do not deal in those. It is bad business, and, separately but not irrelevantly, it would mean writing your death benefit to your listed beneficiary while watching you walk out that door knowing what I know. I find I am no longer willing to do that particular kind of paperwork. Aldous stared at him. Behind Corin, at the corner desk that served as the front office's entire waiting room, his clerk, a small hunched man named Fitch, who had followed Corin from the guild out of either loyalty or simple lack of other prospects, kept his eyes very carefully on his own inventory ledger. You're telling me not to go. I am telling you what the numbers say. What you do with that is and has always been entirely your own contractual prerogative. I am an insurance agent, Master Penn, not your mother. A pause, precisely as long as such pauses always were with Corin. Long enough to register as consideration rather than coldness, if you didn't know him well enough to know it was neither. Red Fang can wait a season. Worm broods relocate. You cannot be unwidowed. It took Aldous Penn 4 more minutes of argument, 1 moment of genuine anger, and finally a long deflating breath before he signed the amended contract. Reduced party, rented siege ballista, a 6-week delay to let the brood migrate north as they reliably did this time of year, and left with a curt nod that was not quite gratitude and not quite resentment. but some grey, uncomfortable thing in between. That was, in Corin's professional experience, the correct outcome. Clients who thanked him effusively rarely came back. Something about the moment embarrassed them too much to repeat it. Clients who left irritated but alive were his best repeat business. Gratitude was for priests. Corin sold outcomes. Behind him, the ledger on the wall did its quiet work, the numbers only he could see, hovering faint and gold over every living thing that passed his window. A beggar outside at 2%, a stray cat at 11% for reasons Corin had long since stopped trying to interrogate, a courier boy sprinting past at a startling 41% that resolved an hour later, according to Fitch's inquiries, into a broken collarbone from a cart accident rather than anything fatal. The system did not distinguish between death and near death with the same crude mercy a human eye might extend. It gave him raw probability and a cause tag, and left the moral weight of interpretation entirely, exhaustingly, to him. System: risk assessor, passive function, active. Target scan range, 40 paces. Time horizon, default 24 hours, adjustable per contract. Certification level, junior adjuster, provisional, under review. That last line was new. It had appeared 3 days ago unprompted, the words under review blinking faintly gold at the edge of his vision like a summons he had not yet opened. Corin had chosen, in the grand strategic tradition of every bureaucrat who has ever lived, to ignore it and hope it resolved itself. It did not resolve itself. It resolved into 6 armed men from the Guild Compliance Office walking into his shopfront 40 minutes later. The whole of adjudication smelled the way it always did: old wax, older parchment, and the particular mildew that accumulates in buildings whose primary function is to make people wait. Corin had testified in this room 11 times over 4 years, always for other people, contesting a denied claim on behalf of a widow, defending a client's equipment failure rider against a guild inspector who wanted to call it negligence. He had never once stood at the small podium meant for the accused. Guildmaster Ossian Veric sat at the high bench with the specific weariness of a man who did not want to be doing this and was going to do it anyway, thoroughly, because thoroughness was the only kind of mercy his office permitted him. Flanking him, 2 senior underwriters from the official guild office, whose entire business model Corin's shopfront had spent the last year quietly making obsolete, and who did not bother to hide their satisfaction. "Corin Ledger," Veric said, "you stand accused of guild fraud in the 2nd degree, specifically the unauthorized use of a rank-unknown system skill to predict client outcomes with a precision no licensed underwriter can replicate, for commercial gain, without disclosure of methodology to the guild actuarial board." "I disclosed my methodology to every client who signed a contract with me," Corin said. "In writing, notarized." "You disclosed a number. You did not disclose how you produced the number, which the charter requires of any party offering risk assessment as a paid service." "The charter requires disclosure of methodology insofar as methodology can be meaningfully explained to a layperson, so they may assess its reliability for themselves. I have a class-restricted system skill that shows me a percentage and a cause tag. There is no diagram I can draw you. I could disclose the entire mechanism, and it would not make my clients 1 increment safer or better informed than the number itself already makes them." "That," said the underwriter to Veric's left, a broad, florid man named Halburn Cray, who ran the standard guild policy desk and whose profits had, Corin happened to know from public filing records, fallen 19% since Corin opened his shop. "Is precisely the problem, Guildmaster. He is not selling insurance. He is selling certainty, dressed up as insurance, and refusing every client he already knows will lose. There's no risk pool. There's no shared burden between the fortunate and unfortunate, which is the entire moral architecture of what we do. He has turned the sacred principle of mutual protection into a filtering mechanism for cowards who can afford to only take bets they've already seen the outcome of. That is not commerce. That is cheating, dressed in a very good suit. Corin considered, not for the first time, how much effort had clearly gone into that line, and how Halburn Cray had probably practiced it in a mirror. I would put it differently, Corin said. I would say that for 4 years, I have sold a product that reliably keeps people alive, at a markup they consider fair, and that the guild's objection is not to my ethics, but to my market share. Is it your position? Varick said, rubbing the bridge of his nose in the manner of a man who had clearly already read this exact argument in the written complaint 3 times. That a business built entirely on refusing to insure anyone who might actually need to make a claim is not, in fact, fraudulent by omission against the very people who most need protection? And there it was. The actual question, underneath all the florid language about sacred principles. Corin had turned it over at night more than once in the narrow room above his shop, in the specific quiet hour after Fitch went home when there was nothing left to fill the silence but the ledger of the day's percentages still glowing faintly behind his eyes. Guildmaster, Corin said, with respect, the people who most need protection are not the ones I refuse. They're the ones I can't reach. I have a scan range of 40 paces and a certification the system itself apparently considers provisional. Every single person who has ever walked through my door already knew, in their bones, that they were taking a real risk. That's why they came to a specialist instead of the standard desk. I did not create anyone's danger. I only refused to be paid for pretending I couldn't see it. He paused. If the guild would like to license the skill itself, formally, and build an actual risk pool product around graduated premiums instead of a flat rate that overcharges the safe and underprices the doomed, I would testify in favor of that tomorrow. I have offered in writing 3 times. I have the receipts if the board would like them entered. The silence that followed was not, Corin noted with the small clinical part of himself that never quite switched off, the silence of a room persuaded. It was the silence of a room that had already decided and was waiting for him to finish so the decision could be formally read aloud. Corin Ledger, Varick said, and did not meet his eyes while he said it, which told Corin everything about how this had actually gone in whatever closed session had happened before this hearing. The board finds you in violation of Guild Charter Section 12, Unauthorized Actuarial Practice, and Section 19, Client Discrimination by Predictive Means. Your license to conduct insurance business within guild-chartered territory is revoked, effective immediately. Your shopfront is to be vacated within 7 days. You are barred from guild membership, guild contracts, and guild-sponsored expedition registration for a period of no less than 10 years, subject to review. A breath. I want it on the record that I don't relish this outcome, Ledger. You kept people alive. But you kept them alive outside the framework this institution exists to maintain. And an institution that permits that, even for good outcomes, doesn't remain an institution for long. I'm sorry. No, Corin said, you're not. But I appreciate the sentiment behind pretending. Halburn Cray did not even try to hide his smile. Fitch was waiting outside on the hall steps, hunched into his coat against the wind that smelled like the coming autumn, holding the shopfront's cash box like it might be confiscated too. They took the license plate off the door already, Fitch said. While you were in there, I watched them do it, didn't even wait. Efficient of them, Corin said. What are you going to do? Corin looked out past the hall steps, past the tiled roofs of the chartered district, towards the low grey line on the horizon where the city's walls gave way to the scrubland everyone called, with the particular contempt cities reserved for places they cannot tax, the frontier. Unlicensed, unregulated, unadjusted. A place where the guild's actuarial tables did not reach, and the only people who went there in numbers were the kind whose risk profiles the standard desk wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole and a signed waiver. 99%, most of them, if his skills scan range had ever stretched that far. He didn't need the system to tell him that. He'd seen the frontier registration numbers. Nobody who went out there expecting to come back bought insurance from anyone, because nobody sold it to them. That, Corin thought, with the specific quiet click of a man doing arithmetic on a problem that had just become both his profession and, though he would not have used the word yet, his purpose, was market failure of a genuinely spectacular kind. 10 years of the entire chartered insurance industry looking at the highest risk population in the world and simply declining to serve it, because the paperwork of failure was more expensive than the paperwork of refusal. Certification review complete. Certification level, Junior Adjuster, confirmed. Special notice. Client base outside chartered jurisdiction detected as viable underwriting pool. Compensation multiplier available for prevented total loss events at elevated base risk, greater than or equal to 95%. Multiplier scales inversely with survival probability at time of intervention. Note: agent is reminded that self-coverage remains restricted under Occupational Hazard Clause. See Policyholder of Record. Corin read that last line twice, the way he always did, and got, as he always did, nothing further from it. Policyholder of Record. Not his name, never his name. He had asked the system quietly more than once who exactly held the policy on his own life, and had received every single time the same silence a filing clerk gives a question above their pay grade. "Fitch," he said, "how do you feel about the frontier?" Fitch went slightly pale. "The frontier is where people go to die, sir." "Yes," Corin said, and for the first time in the entire hearing something that was almost a smile moved across his face, thin, dry and entirely without malice, the expression of a man who has just found the fine print everyone else forgot to read. Which is precisely why nobody has ever sold them a policy. Pack the ledgers. We're relocating the business. Chapter 2. Total Loss. The frontier town of Greywatch did not have a guild hall, a chartered market square, or a single building whose foundation had been laid with anything resembling a permit. It had a wall made of whatever the last 3 settlements had been able to drag there before something ate the people building it. A well that 4 separate signs claimed was safe to drink from, and a population that turned over, according to the innkeeper who sold Corin his first week's lodging, at a rate that made the man laugh when Corin asked for an actual number. "You want a census," the innkeeper said, a broad woman named Olitha, with a scar that ran from ear to collarbone and the specific squint of someone who had outlived several definitions of safe. "You're in the wrong line of work, friend. Nobody counts heads out here. You just notice after a season whose face you stopped seeing." "That," Corin said, setting down his coin, "is exactly the market inefficiency I intend to correct." Olitha laughed at him for a solid 10 seconds, decided he was serious somewhere around second 8, and stopped laughing rather abruptly. He had been in Greywatch 4 hours. He had already logged from the inn's front step alone 11 scan targets, 6 of them above 80%, 2 of them above 95%. Nobody here flinched at those numbers the way Aldous Penn had flinched. Nobody here had the luxury. New territory detected. Uncharted frontier zone. Ambient risk saturation high. Standard actuarial models non-applicable. Certification level junior. Adjuster compensation multiplier for prevented total loss events remains active and elevated. Recommend establishing local operations. Corin had read that notice roughly 9 times on the walk-in, mostly because it was the first time since the hearing that the system had sounded, in its dry procedural way, almost pleased with him. He tried not to read too much into a piece of interface text. He failed slightly and moved on. He was setting up the frame of a folding writing desk outside the inn. No shopfront yet, no funds for one. Just a desk, a stool, a hand-lettered sign reading "Risk Consultation, first quote free," and Fitch's deeply unconvinced expression when he saw the girl walk out of the alley between the smithy and what might have once been a chapel, and his entire scan range lit up gold at once, the way it never had before, not for a single client in 4 years of chartered practice. 100%. Not 94. Not 99. The ordinary ceiling he'd learned to associate with technically still alive if a miracle intervenes. 100. Flat. Absolute. No cause tag flickering with the small margin of uncertainty a tag always carried. Just the number itself, sitting over her head with the terrible, featureless certainty of a closed account. She was maybe 20, dressed in patched leathers with a short blade at her hip that had clearly been resharpened more times than it had been properly forged, walking with an ease that suggested either total confidence or total indifference to the fact that, as far as Corin's system was concerned, she was already, in every meaningful actuarial sense, dead. He had never seen a 100% before. He had read about them, a line item in old guild training material, a theoretical ceiling case discussed the way a physician might discuss a diagnosis technically compatible with life, but never actually observed to be. Certainty events. The material had called them uninsurable by definition, the one honest use of that word Corin had ever encountered in an actuarial textbook. Because insurance requires risk, and risk requires the possibility, however small, of the other outcome. There is no policy you can write against a sure thing. Problem? The girl said, and Corin realized he had been staring for a beat longer than professional courtesy allowed. No, he said, which was, in the specific and narrow sense that he had not yet decided what to do about it, entirely true. I run a risk consultation practice, new to town. May I ask your name? Ren. She looked him over, the writing desk, the sign, Fitch's ledgers, the general air of a man who had clearly been somewhere with actual walls very recently and was finding the adjustment difficult. You're the insurance man. Word travels fast out here. Olitha's already telling people you tried to sell her fire coverage on a building made of stone. An oversight. I misjudged the local construction materials. He kept his voice level, the same level he'd used on Aldous Penn, the same level that had kept his hands from shaking through 11 years of telling people true and terrible things. Ren, I'd like to offer you a consultation, no charge for the first assessment. I don't buy insurance. Something moved behind her eyes when she said it. Not defensiveness exactly, more like the particular weary patience of someone repeating an answer they'd given many times before to many people who'd asked for reasons of their own, none of them insurance. Nobody out here does. Waste of coin on people who mostly don't come back anyway. I'm aware. I'm not selling you a policy today. I'm telling you, professionally and without charge, that in my 10 years of actuarial practice I have never once seen a reading like the one currently sitting over your head, and I would like to understand why, if you're willing to indulge me. That got her attention in a way the sales pitch hadn't. She went still, not frightened stillness. Corin noted with the part of his mind that never entirely stopped cataloguing, but interested stillness. The stillness of someone who has been waiting a long time for a particular kind of conversation and had stopped expecting to have it. What's the number? She said. Corin considered for exactly as long as it took to remember that he had just spent a week losing his license over the accusation that he withheld information from clients, and decided that whatever else happened here, he would not begin his new practice by lying to the first person who'd asked him a direct question. 100%, he said. No cause tag, no margin. I don't have language for what that means because I've never encountered it. I'd assumed it was theoretical. Ren's mouth did something that was not quite a smile. Thinner, older, the kind of expression that had been worn into a face by repetition rather than felt fresh in the moment. Everyone else out here reads high and gets a number.
90, 95, whatever the local seer or the temple priests or the guild scryer wants to charge me to say.
I get told 100 every single time by everyone who's ever bothered to look. 6 years now. Priests, scryers, a dying oracle who took one look at me and refused payment, which, take it from me, never happens. She shrugged, and the gesture had the particular practiced carelessness of something that had cost a great deal to make casual. I'm the girl who's supposed to already be dead. Been that girl since I was 14. Turns out you can just keep not doing it. For 6 years. For 6 years. She said it flatly, daring him to make it strange, and Corin, who had spent 6 years, give or take, watching numbers resolve into funerals with a punctuality that had never once impressed him as anything other than grim, found himself, for possibly the first time since he'd taken up the trade, genuinely without a prepared response. Anomaly flagged. Target sustains 100% cumulative risk rating across extended time horizon without resolution. No precedent in agent's operational history. Recommend extended observation. I'm aware, Corin thought with some asperity at a notification that could not hear him. I have a proposal, he said aloud. And I want to be transparent that it's an unusual one, and that I am, professionally, breaking a rule I have held for 11 years by making it. He paused, weighing the sentence before he said it, the way he weighed every sentence that mattered. I don't sell policies to certainty events. That's been true my entire career, because a policy against 100% isn't insurance. It's charity dressed up as a contract, and I don't believe in dressing things up as what they're not. But I would like instead to make you an offer that has nothing to do with a policy. I would like to follow you into whatever it is that's been reading 100% at you for 6 years and see if I can change the number. Not with luck, with work. Ren looked at him for a long moment, the alley's shade falling half across her face, and Corin had the distinct sense, one he would remember much later, once he understood considerably more than he did now about what the system's compensation multiplier actually rewarded and why, of being assessed by someone doing an entirely different kind of arithmetic than his own. There's a nest of banehounds 2 miles out, she said finally. Feeding ground for something bigger nobody's identified yet. I go out there once a week and thin the pack before it grows enough to come into town proper. Been doing it alone since the last person who partnered me on it decided 100% was contagious. A beat. You want to come watch the number, insurance man? You're welcome to. I won't slow down for you. And when it doesn't change, because it won't, it never has, I don't want to hear a speech about it. Corin, he said. Not insurance man. And I don't give speeches. I file reports. That finally got the smile all the way to her eyes. The Banehound feeding ground was a shallow ravine 2 miles northeast of Greywatch's crumbling wall, thick with the particular sour ammonia stink of a den that had been active for longer than anyone had bothered to clear it. Ren moved through the scrub with the flat, unhurried economy of someone who had made this exact walk enough times to have stopped being afraid of the individual steps, saving whatever fear she had left for the larger, structural fact of her own existence. Corin followed at 4 paces, watching the number over her head hold steady at 100 with the same featureless persistence it had shown in town, and running beneath the observation a set of calculations he had never had cause to run before. Standard risk scaling assumed danger correlated with exposure. More banehounds, higher percentage. A curve you could graph. Ren's number did not move because Ren's number was not, he was increasingly certain, actually about the banehounds at all. It read like a fixed condition layered over the top of ordinary danger, a note stapled to the front of her file rather than a live calculation of the ravine's current threat. Subtarget detected, cause tag obscured, recommend proximity engagement to attempt resolution. The pack came up out of the ravine in a loose scattering formation. 8 of them, lean and grey-hided with the too many teeth of things that had been shaped by a place that punished anything that wasn't built for killing efficiently.
Ren was already moving, blade out, into the gap between the first two before Corin had finished processing that the fight had started. And for several minutes he did the only thing he was actually equipped to do in a melee he had no combat training for. He stood at the ravine's lip, watched numbers, and shouted. "Behind you! The one flanking left, it's reading a strike probability spike. Incoming in 3 seconds. Now!" Ren pivoted without questioning why a strange insurance agent she'd met 4 hours ago was suddenly calling her combat timing, took the flanking hound across the throat on the turn, and kept moving. It was, Corin noted with the small detached part of himself that filed everything for later analysis, an extremely efficient use of a scan skill nobody in 11 years of chartered practice had ever thought to deploy this way.
Advisory underwriting had never included live tactical calling in its job description. It was, apparently, an oversight in his own training, not the charter's. The fight took under 4 minutes. Ren ended it breathing hard, one long, shallow cut along her forearm that she didn't appear to have noticed yet, standing over the last hound with a stillness that had nothing casual left in it at all. Corin scanned her. 100%, unmoved, unchanged. The number sat there with the same closed-account finality it had held in the alley, indifferent to the fact that she had just, by any reasonable measure, survived. "Told you," Ren said, not looking at him, wiping her blade on the grass with short, hard strokes. "Doesn't move. 6 years, insurance man. It's not going to move because you stood on a ridge shouting directions at me for one fight." Corin didn't answer immediately. He was looking past her at the mouth of the ravine proper, where the den's stink was thickest, and where his scan, pushed without his quite meaning to push it further and deeper than its stated 40-pace range had ever previously reached, had just resolved something new. Not a banehound. Something large, coiled and patient in the ravine's deeper shadow, radiating the specific ambient wrongness of a creature whose presence alone the local ecology had organized itself around, the way a drought organizes a landscape. And over it, where a cause tag should have been, a single notation his system had never shown him before, gold letters resolving slow and heavy in his vision like a seal being pressed into wax. Cause tag. Bound contract. See Ren. Target. "Ren," Corin said, very quietly, the flat professional calm in his voice costing him considerably more than it usually did. "I need you to tell me exactly what happened to you when you were 14. Chapter 3. Underwriting the Impossible. Ren did not answer him in the ravine. She answered him 3 hours later, back in Greywatch, at a corner table in Olitha's inn, with a bandage on her forearm and a mug of something that smelled like it had been brewed specifically to discourage questions. And by then, Corin had already spent the walk back running the phrase "bound contract" through every framework of actuarial law he knew, none of which had a category for it. "There was a shrine," Ren said, turning the mug in slow circles without drinking from it. "Out past the old quarry, before the quarry was old. My village made offerings there, nothing formal, nothing the temple would have recognized, just old field custom stuff. The kind every farming village on this continent has some version of. Leave a coin, leave a lock of hair, ask the lady of the ledger to keep the wolves off the herd." She said the title flatly, without reverence, the way people say the names of gods they've stopped being able to afford to believe in comfortably. "I was 14. My little brother wandered out to the shrine at dusk because he'd heard older kids say you could make a wish there. Something came out of the tree line before he made it back. I got there first." Corin said nothing. He had learned over 11 years that the worst thing you could do to a client mid-disclosure was fill their silences for them. "I don't remember agreeing to anything," Ren said.
I remember the thing had my brother by the collar, and I remember offering out loud like an idiot, like it was a real transaction, that it could have me instead. And it looked at me. Not at him, at me.
Like it was actually considering the terms. Her mouth twisted. It let him go. It didn't take me either. It just left. Walked back into the trees like the conversation was over. I thought that was the end of it. Then, a week later, a hedge priest passing through town took one look at me and turned white as a sheet and told me my thread had been marked for collection, deferred. I didn't know what that meant. I still don't, not really. I just know every scryer, every priest, every oracle who's looked at me since has read the same number, and none of them have ever been able to tell me what's actually holding the bill. A deferred collection, Corinne said slowly, is not the same thing as a completed one. No, Wren agreed. It's worse. A completed collection at least is over. Corinne sat with that for a long moment, turning it the way he turned every case file that didn't resolve cleanly against the categories he already had. And there weren't many of those in 11 years, which was precisely why this one had his full and undivided attention in a way no client since his very first had managed. A bound contract. Deferred, not fulfilled. A creature in a ravine radiating a cause tag that referenced her by name, as though the system itself recognized the debt as still open, still active, still, in the specific and narrow sense that mattered to a man in his line of work, underwritten by someone else, badly, for 6 years, with no premium ever collected and no claim ever formally paid out. That, Corinne thought, was not a certainty event. That was the single worst drafted insurance contract he had ever seen in his professional life, and he had seen the standard guild policy template. "Wren," he said, "I want to walk you through something, and I want you to stop me if any part of it doesn't make sense, because I am about to describe a theory I have never had occasion to test on a case type I did not know existed until 3 hours ago." He folded his hands, the old posture, the one that had talked 100 grieving beneficiaries through complicated payout structures without once losing them. 100% reading, in every case I've encountered before today, means a resolved outcome. An event so certain the system stops treating it as probability and starts treating it as fact. But facts don't sit open for 6 years. Facts resolve. What you have isn't a fact. It's a claim that was filed by you at 14 in the form of an offer that creature apparently accepted in some partial, unfinished way and never settled. The system is reading it as total loss because from a strict actuarial standpoint, an open, unbounded, uncollected debt against your life is total loss, structurally, even if the collection date keeps sliding. It's not that you're going to die with certainty at some specific moment. It's that you are, on the books, already owed. Wren's hand had gone very still on the mug. "You're saying I'm not cursed. I'm in arrears." "I'm saying," Corinne said, and felt the specific, quiet click of a man arriving somewhere he had not expected to arrive, somewhere considerably larger than a Banehound contract. "That whoever or whatever is holding that paper has been carrying an unresolved liability against you for 6 years without either collecting or discharging it, which, under any actuarial framework I have ever operated in, is not fate. It's negligence. And negligent liability holders can, in principle, be forced to either collect or release." He met her eyes. "I don't know yet whether that thing in the ravine is the actual holder or a collections agent working for someone further up the chain. The cause tag referenced you specifically, which suggests direct interest. But I've never seen a tag structured that way, and I don't want to overstate my confidence. What I do know is that 100% that hasn't resolved in 6 years is not fixed. It stalled. And stalled things, Ren, are the only kind of thing in my entire profession I have ever been any good at moving. For a long moment, Ren said nothing at all. Then lo. Everyone else told me to stop asking. Priests, the old oracle, even the last partner I had before I started doing the ravine runs alone. Good man, meant well. Told me some numbers just are what they are and I should make peace with mine before it made peace with me. A short, humorless breath. You're the first person in 6 years who's looked at my death sentence and called it a filing error. It might not be, Corin said. I want to be honest that I'm extrapolating from limited data on a case type that, as far as I can determine, doesn't appear in any guild training material I've ever read. But I would like your permission to treat this as an open case rather than a closed one, professionally. I'll need to observe the site further, and I suspect I'll need considerably more information than either of us currently has about who the Lady of the Ledger actually is, institutionally, and whether the local temple has any formal relationship with her that might explain the paperwork. You want to fight a god's debt collector with paperwork? I want to fight a god's debt collector, Corin said, with the correct and specific tool for the job, which in this instance happens to be paperwork, yes. I would remind you that I have, in the past 4 years, successfully forced 17 separate guild claims adjusters to pay out policies they were extremely reluctant to honor, using nothing but correctly cited clauses and an unwillingness to leave their office until they did. I do not consider divinity a meaningful obstacle to that particular skill set. I consider it at most a more senior counterparty. Something in Ren's face, the thin, careful, 6-year-old wariness of someone who had stopped letting herself hope about this specific subject a long time ago, cracked, very slightly, into something that was not quite hope, but was standing very close to where hope would have been if it had been allowed back in the building. Fine, she said. You want the case? It's yours. But I'm not sitting in town while you read old scrolls, Corin. Whatever you're building out here, I want in on it properly, not as a client, as whatever it is you're actually recruiting under the sales pitch. Corin looked at her for a moment, at the still seeping bandage on her forearm, at the 6 years of a number she'd learned to carry like a job rather than a sentence. At the particular, hard, stubborn set of someone who had decided a long time ago that if the universe was going to insist on 100%, she would at least choose what she did with the time the universe apparently kept forgetting to collect. Compensation multiplier reassessed. Target risk profile reclassified. Stalled claim, not resolved outcome. Casing for future, prevented total loss resolution. Significantly elevated due to duration of unresolved liability. Recommend party formation. I run a small operation, Corin said, currently consisting of 1 disillusioned actuary and 1 very tired clerk. I intend to build it into a practice that specifically serves people the standard desk won't touch. People whose numbers everyone else has decided are simply fixed. If you're offering to be my second case study and my first field partner, I accept, on the condition that you understand exactly what you're signing up for. I am not promising you a miracle. I am promising you that I will treat your file as open until I have exhausted every legitimate means of closing it in your favor, and that I will tell you the truth about the number at every stage, good or bad. Ren extended a hand, the one without the bandage. That's the first time in 6 years anybody's offered me a contract instead of a eulogy. I have a form for this, Corin said, already reaching for his satchel. And Ren laughed, a real laugh, short and surprised out of her, the first one Corin had heard from her all day. And somewhere behind the bar, Aletha, who had been very obviously not listening to the entire conversation while polishing the same mug for the last 20 minutes, muttered something that sounded remarkably like, "Finally, somebody in this town doing something other than dying quietly." The paperwork, actual paperwork, Drawn up that same night at the corner table by candlelight, Fitch summoned from his room to serve as witness and looking simultaneously terrified and, Corin noted, faintly delighted to be doing his old job again, established what Corin was already privately calling, in the part of his mind that still thought in guild categories out of 11 years of habit, a cooperative underwriting partnership. Ren would provide combat capability and frontier knowledge. Corin would provide risk assessment, tactical calling, and whatever legal and procedural leverage could be brought to bear on a debt that, as far as either of them could determine, no living authority had ever formally acknowledged existed. Party formation. Confirmed. Party member added, Ren Duskett. Current risk rating, 100%. Stalled claim, under active dispute. Certification level, Junior Adjuster. New skill unlocked. Shared risk ledger. Party members' risk ratings now visible to all bonded members within scan range. Corin read the notification twice, the second time more slowly. On shared risk ledger, and felt something shift very quietly into place. Not triumph, not yet, nothing so simple as that. Just the specific, familiar satisfaction of a man who has spent 4 years watching a broken market fail the people who needed it most, finally holding in his hands the first real instrument capable of doing something about it. "There's someone else you should meet," Ren said once the ink was dry and Fitch had gone back to bed clutching the witnessed copy like it might dissolve. "Down at the smithy. Man goes by Bram. Ex-guild soldier, did 2 full decades on the border campaigns before he washed up out here. Everyone in town gives him a wide berth." "Why?" "Because," Ren said with the particular dry weight of someone delivering the punchline to a joke she'd stopped finding funny a long time ago, "every priest who's ever passed through Greywatch takes one look at him and refuses to say his number out loud. Even the ones who'll tell a farmer to his face he's got 3 weeks left." Whatever's sitting over that man's head, Corin, nobody in this town has been willing to speak it in 6 years. Corin set down his pen very carefully, the way he always did when a case was about to become considerably larger than the one he'd walked in expecting to close. "I look forward," he said, "to reading the file myself." He did not get to read it that night. Fitch woke him before dawn, already dressed, already pale in the particular way that meant bad news rather than merely early news. "Rider came in overnight," Fitch said. "Guild courier. Chartered colors and everything, which, sir, nobody sends chartered couriers out here. The fee alone would eat a season's supply budget. He's asking for you by name at Olitha's stable." The courier turned out to be a thin, nervous young man named Perrin, who had clearly drawn the short straw for this particular assignment and knew it, and who handed over a sealed letter with the specific relief of someone glad to be rid of an object rather than glad to deliver it. The letter was from Halburn Cray. "Master Ledger," it read, in a hand too neat to have been dashed off in anger, which somehow made it worse. "I trust the Frontier Heir agrees with you. I write to inform you, as a professional courtesy you did not extend me during the hearing, that the Guild's Standard Desk has opened a Frontier Expansion Initiative effective this season, offering flat-rate coverage to all registered settlements within the uncharted territories, Greywatch included. I understand you have been operating an unlicensed practice there. I would encourage you, in the interest of the very transparency you were so fond of lecturing the board about, to inform your clients that a fully chartered alternative is now available to them, at standard guild rates, backed by the full financial reserves of an institution considerably older and more solvent than a single disbarred actuary and his desk. Do give my regards to whatever remains of your operation. Vich C. Corin read it twice, standing in the cold stable-yard dawn with his breath fogging in front of him, and felt something settle into place that was not quite anger. Closer to the specific, focused clarity he associated with the moment a case's actual shape finally became visible beneath its opening complaint. He's not expanding into the frontier because he's suddenly discovered a market, Corin said, half to himself, half to Fitch,
who was hovering with the letter now clutched in both hands like it might need to be filed.
He's expanding because Maron's evidence is a threat to him specifically, and the fastest way to make a disbarred actuary's testimony irrelevant is to make sure nobody in his new territory needs to listen to it. If the standard desk sets up shop here first, at a subsidized loss leader rate he can afford and I can't, and undercuts every quote I've made this month, it doesn't matter whether I'm right about the archive. It matters whether anyone's still buying from me by the time the board gets around to reviewing Maron's file. So what do we do? Fitch said. Corin folded the letter, precise corners, the way he folded every piece of correspondence that was about to become evidence in a much longer dispute than its author intended. We do what we've been doing since the Hall of Adjudication took the license plate off my door before I'd even finished losing the hearing. We keep closing files the standard desk has never had the competence or the will to close. And we let the 11 households in that valley decide for themselves which insurance agent actually kept their families alive this season.
He looked up at the paling sky, the first frost of the coming season silvering the stable-yard fence.
Halburn Cray has spent 19 years building an institution on the assumption that nobody would ever be able to prove the difference between his product and mine. I intend to spend considerably less time proving him wrong.
Chapter 4. The Archive Leak. The smithy sat at the edge of Greywatch nearest the tree line, close enough to the wall that Corin suspected it had been built there deliberately by a man who wanted the shortest possible distance between his forge and whatever came out of the dark. Bram Kestrel was exactly the size the rumours had implied and roughly a decade older than Corin had pictured. Built like something the Frontier had forged on purpose and then decided against finishing. A jaw full of old scars. One eye clouded pale from an injury nobody in town claimed to know the story of, and hands that moved over the half-shaped blade on his anvil with a gentleness that seemed entirely at odds with the rest of him. He did not look up when Corin and Wren approached. "You're the insurance man," Bram said in a voice like gravel settling. "Wren's been telling people about you all afternoon. Says you called her 100% a filing error." "I said it might be," Corin said. "I don't overstate confidence in a client's presence. Bad practice." Bram set down his hammer finally and turned. And Corin's scan resolved before the man had even fully faced him, and stayed resolving, the number climbing and steadying, and climbing again in a way Corin had genuinely never observed before, not once. Not in 11 years of watching numbers settle cleanly into place the instant a target entered range. 99%.
But beneath it, where a cost tag should have sat as a single clean line, there was instead a dense, layered stack of them, dozens deep, half legible, the gold text of each one bleeding faintly into the next like a ledger page someone had tried to erase and rewrite too many times to count. Cost tag overflow. Target risk profile exceeds standard tag capacity, displaying most recent 6 of 214 recorded incidents. 214. Corin had underwritten men who'd survived exactly one brush with death and walked around afterward like it had made them philosophers. He had never in his life scanned a living person carrying 214 separate close calls stacked into a single unresolved risk profile, each one apparently significant enough that the system had bothered to log it rather than let it fold into background noise the way ordinary near misses did. "You're staring," Bram said without heat. "My apologies. I've never seen a profile like yours. 214 logged incidents is not a risk rating, Master Kestrel. It's a career." Something that might, on a less battered face, have been a smile moved briefly across Bram's mouth. 22 years on the border campaigns. You don't survive that long as line infantry without the officers starting to call you lucky. And once they start calling you lucky, they start putting you on the missions nobody else comes back from. Because command math says somebody's luck ought to get spent on the worst jobs rather than wasted on the easy ones. I've been the last man standing in 9 separate engagements where I was meant to be dead alongside everyone else. Command started keeping a private tally toward the end. Wasn't flattering once I saw it. Read like an actuarial table for how much borrowed time a man can carry before the ledger balances itself. He turned back to the anvil, hefted the hammer again, though he didn't strike. Priests round here won't say my number. I stopped needing them to a long time ago. I know what 200 close calls means better than any hedge priest reading tea leaves of a shrine offering. It means I've been spending something for 22 years that doesn't refill, and eventually the account closes, and no amount of luck talks its way out of a closed account. That, Corin said quietly, is the most sophisticated actuarial reasoning I have ever heard from someone without formal training, and I include several guild-certified underwriters in that assessment. Bram huffed, something almost like amusement. Spent enough years listening to quartermasters justify why the unlucky companies got the good supply lines. Man picks up the vocabulary of his own exploitation eventually, if he's paying attention. Corin was quiet for a moment, turning the profile over. 214 logged near-fatal incidents, a 99% sitting not as a single clean probability, but as the compressed structural weight of 2 decades spent as someone else's acceptable loss, budgeted for in advance by officers who treated his survival as a resource to be drawn down rather than a life to be protected.
It was, Corin thought, with a coldness that had nothing to do with his usual professional detachment and everything to do with something closer to genuine anger. One of the ugliest pieces of institutional underwriting he had ever encountered. And it had been done not by a monster in a ravine, but by an army's own logistics office, in plain ink, for over 20 years. Master Kestrel, Corin said, I would like to open a file on your case as well, if you're permitted. I want to be direct about my reasoning, since directness seems to be the only currency you actually respect. Your risk profile does not read to me like a man who's simply used up his luck. It reads like a man whose life was chronically and deliberately mispriced by people who benefited from underpaying for it. I don't know yet whether that can be corrected the way I believe Ren's contract can.
But I would like the chance to find out, and I would very much like your labor and your 214 incidents worth of frontier experience on my side of the ledger, rather than leaving both to accumulate quietly in this forge until the account, as you put it, closes. Bram set the hammer down again, properly this time, and looked at Corin for a long moment with the pale, clouded eye and the good one both, the particular assessing look of a soldier deciding whether an officer's promise was worth the paper it wasn't yet written on. 22 years, he said. Nobody in any command tent ever once asked me what I thought my odds actually were. They just told me. A slow breath. You're the first one who's asked instead of told. I'll hear your terms. System. Party formation. Confirmed. Party member added. Bram Kestrel. Current risk rating. 99%. Compounded libate. 200 recorded incidents. Chronic underpricing suspected. Party size. 3. They found Maren Colt waiting for them back at the inn, and Corin knew the instant he saw her that she had not come to Greywatch by accident. She was younger than Corin had expected from the description Aletha eventually gave. Early 20s, dressed in the deliberately unremarkable travel clothes of someone who had gone to some trouble not to look like what she was, which Corin identified within about 4 sentences as career guild archivist, from the particular way she organized her explanation before she gave it, the same instinct he recognized in himself. You're Corin Ledger, she said before he'd finished sitting down across from her. I need you to know that before I say anything else, because I need you to decide right now whether you want to hear what I have, or whether it's safer for both of us if I just leave and you never saw me. I'd generally prefer to make informed decisions, Corin said. Go ahead.
Marin set a slim, worn satchel on the table between them and did not open it yet. I worked the Guild's Central Archive for 6 years. Records Division. Everything that goes into a hearing file before it ever reaches the board.
I processed the intake documents for your case, Master Ledger. All of them, including the ones that never made it into the hearing. Her jaw tightened. Halburn Cray filed a formal profit-loss complaint against your practice 4 months before the fraud charge was ever brought. Not a fraud complaint, a market share complaint addressed directly to 2 board members he golfs with, requesting, his word, a compliance pretext to shut you down before your model spread to other chartered cities and, I'm quoting directly, set an expectation among the client base that risk-adjusted pricing was owed to them. The fraud investigation wasn't a response to a violation, Master Ledger. It was manufactured, on order, to protect 19% of quarterly revenue. Corin sat very still. He had suspected something close to this, had said something close to it dryly in the hearing itself, but suspecting a thing and holding the actual paper trail in front of him were, he discovered, 2 entirely different experiences. And the second one arrived considerably colder than he'd anticipated.
"Why do you have this?" he said. "And why are you handing it to me in a frontier tap room instead of, say, burning it?" "Because I read your client files while I was processing the complaint," Marin said, and something in her voice cracked slightly. The first unguarded thing she'd said since sitting down. "I read all of them. Widows who got paid out in full, on time, without a fight, because you'd priced the risk honestly from the start instead of hoping the claim would never come due. I've spent 6 years processing the standard desk's files too, Master Ledger. I know what an actual fraud looks like from the inside, and it's not a man who tells people the truth about their odds. It's a desk that sells the same flat rate policy to a farmer and a worm hunter and prices in from the start that enough of the worm hunters will die unpaid to subsidize everyone else's premium. I stayed quiet about it for 6 years because I needed the position, and I told myself that was somebody else's fight." She pushed the satchel across the table. "It stopped being somebody else's fight the day I watched them manufacture a case against the one person in this entire industry who was actually pricing risk honestly. I copied everything before I resigned. I don't have a plan beyond getting it to you. I just knew I couldn't keep sitting on it." Corin opened the satchel, read in the low lamplight for a considerably longer time than the conversation around him paused for. Wren and Bram trading a glance over the top of his bent head, Fitch hovering nearby with the specific stillness of a man who recognized, correctly, that something important was happening and had the sense not to interrupt it. When Corin finally looked up, his expression had not changed in any way a stranger could have read. But Wren, who had known him 4 days, and Bram, who had known him considerably fewer hours than that, both saw something move behind his eyes that had not been there at the hearing. Not triumph, not yet, but the particular quiet, dangerous stillness of a man who has just been handed, free of charge, exactly the evidence he needs to file the largest claim of his professional life. "Miss Colt," Corin said, closing the satchel with great care as though it might otherwise spill something considerably more volatile than paper. "I don't currently have funds to offer you a competitive salary, an office with walls, or anything resembling the stability you just walked away from. What I can offer you is a case file that is about to get a great deal more interesting. A business partner who reads evidence for a living and has just been handed the best evidence of his career. And my professional word that nothing you've handed me tonight will be wasted, misplaced, or filed away out of caution." He extended his hand. "Will you keep working the archive? For me, instead of for them?" Marin looked at his hand for a moment. The same look Wren had given him 2 days earlier.
The look of someone who has been offered a genuine contract after years of being handed only vague and self-serving promises. And took it. System. Party formation. Confirmed. Party member added, Maron Colt. Current risk rating, 34%. Elevated. Guild retaliation exposure flagged. Monitoring recommended. Party size, 4.
Certification level, Junior Adjuster. Review triggered by documented institutional misconduct. Escalation pending. Corin read the last line 3 times before it fully settled. Escalation pending, and for the first time since the whole of adjudication had stripped his license off the shop front door, allowed himself the small, dry, entirely professional satisfaction of a man who has just watched a very badly drafted contract begin, quietly and irrevocably, to come due against the party who wrote it. Chapter 5. A Claim Against the Divine. The mass casualty event that made Corin Ledger's frontier practice a matter of regional record began, as these things so often did in his experience, as a routine seasonal problem that nobody chartered had bothered to price correctly. Greywatch sat at the mouth of a shallow valley that flooded every autumn when the northern snowmelt came down faster than the old drainage channels, dug, according to Olitha, by settlers 3 generations dead who had never anticipated the town growing past 40 households could carry it. Every year, a handful of people drowned or were swept into the ravine systems trying to save livestock. And every year, the town simply absorbed the loss as the ordinary cost of living somewhere nobody chartered wanted to maintain properly. Because maintaining it properly would have required an engineer's fee nobody local could afford, and no chartered guild considered profitable enough to send one. Corin, 4 weeks into his frontier practice and with a scan range that had, quietly, without any notification he could point to, begun extending past its original 40 paces the more he used it, walked the valley the week before the melt was due, and came back with 11 names. 11, Fitch said, reading the list over Corin's shoulder in the cramped back room that now served as their office, cot, and archive all at once. That's not a policy quote, sir. That's a casualty report you're writing in advance. It's both, Corin said. That's rather the point. He set down the list. 11 households, risk ratings ranging from 61% to a grim 88%, each one tagged with the same cause: flood exposure, drainage failure, preventable. The guild standard desk would price flood coverage on this valley at a flat regional rate, collect premiums from all 40 households, and pay out claims on whichever 11 happen to die, treating the loss as an acceptable cost of the risk pool. I intend instead to spend the next 6 days making sure none of these 11 people are among the dead, because I have now confirmed, with reasonable actuarial confidence, exactly which structural failure kills each of them, and every single one of those failures is a repair job, not a fate. It took 6 days, 4 party members working in rotation and, Corin would admit later, with the specific dry understatement that had become something of a running joke among his small and growing team, a genuinely alarming quantity of manual labour for a man whose entire professional training was in paperwork. Bram reinforced the worst of the drainage channels with the smithy's help. Ren scouted the 2 households whose risk stemmed from livestock stranded on the wrong side of rising water and physically moved the animals herself, twice at considerable danger to her own already catastrophic risk rating, which Corin monitored obsessively throughout and which, notably, did not move from 100% regardless of what she survived. A data point he filed away with the rest of the growing evidence that her number was not measuring what everyone had always assumed it measured. Maren, working from the archive copies she'd brought with her, identified 2 households whose original settlement paperwork had granted them water rights nobody had exercised in decades. Rights that turned out to include an old, unused spillway easement that solved the worst of the flooding at Household 7 entirely, on paper, the moment Corin filed the correct forgotten form with the Frontier's nominal, barely functional local registrar. When the melt came, on the 7th day, the valley flooded exactly as predicted.
Nobody died. Mass total loss event confirmed. 11 targets, cumulative average risk 74%, successfully resolved to 0% fatality outcome.
Compensation multiplier applied. Experience gain, substantial. Certification level, adjusted, promoted. New notification, divine tier observation detected. Recommend caution. That last line arrived roughly 40 minutes before Sister Vesper Aurelia walked into Greywatch, and Corin, reading it in the golden aftermath light of a flood that hadn't killed anyone, standing ankle-deep in mud with Ren, Bram and Marin all looking for possibly the first time since he'd met each of them, something close to unguardedly pleased with themselves, had approximately no warning at all before the entire tenor of his afternoon changed. She arrived on foot, alone, in the plain grey travel robes of a working cleric rather than the ceremonial vestments Corin associated with temple hierarchy, and she walked through Greywatch's half-flooded main street with the specific, unhurried precision of someone who had already decided exactly where she was going and did not intend to be delayed by the mud.
Corin's scan resolved her risk rating, a modest, almost aggressively unremarkable 3%, the number of someone whose safety was evidently an institutional given rather than an earned or contested thing. And then, beneath it, a cause tag he had never seen attached to a living person before. Affiliation: Temple of the Lady of the Ledger, Senior Clergy. Direct Divine Mandate. Lady of the Ledger. The same title Ren had used, flatly, without reverence, describing the shrine where her contract had been struck 6 years ago. Corin Ledger, the woman said, stopping in front of him with the mud soaking unhurried into the hem of her robes. I am Sister Vesper Aurelia, of the Temple of the Lady of the Ledger. I have been sent to have a conversation with you about the nature of your professional conduct, and I want to open by telling you plainly that I did not volunteer for this assignment. I requested it. Us an unusually honest opening for a temple emissary, Corin said.
I'd like to say I appreciate it, but I suspect I'm about to be informed of something I won't. You would be correct. Vesper's expression did not shift, but something behind her eyes did. A controlled, careful weight that reminded Corin uncomfortably of his own professional composure. The specific, practiced calm of someone who has learned to deliver difficult truths without letting the difficulty show. You resolved 11 fatal outcomes this week through structural intervention rather than divine appeal. That is not in itself a violation of anything. Mortals save other mortals from preventable deaths constantly, and the lady does not object to competent engineering. A pause, precise as a held breath. What concerns the temple is the growing pattern over the past month of a mortal actuary developing the capacity to read and dispute fixed-risk allocations that were never intended to be disputed. Allocations the lady's office considers, and has considered for centuries, settled ledger entries, not open negotiations. Are you referring, Corin said carefully, to a specific settled ledger entry currently standing at 100%, 6 years unresolved, attached to a woman named Ren Duskett? Something in Vesper's controlled expression cracked, very slightly, for just long enough that Corin, who had spent 11 years reading the small, betraying details people couldn't quite keep off their faces during a difficult negotiation, caught it and filed it immediately. That case, Vesper said, and her voice had gone a fraction tighter, is precisely why I requested this assignment personally, Master Ledger, rather than allow it to be handled by someone with less direct familiarity with the file. She looked past him briefly to where Ren stood watching the exchange with an expression Corin couldn't quite read, old wariness layered over something newer and sharper. I processed her original claim intake myself 6 years ago as a junior clergy member. I entered the deferral into the ledger personally. I have watched that entry sit unresolved for 6 years because the collecting party has never returned to formally close it,
and temple procedure does not permit unilateral discharge of an open claim without the collector's consent, regardless of how long it sits, regardless of how badly, in my professional opinion, it was ever drafted in the first place. A breath. Controlled. Deliberate. I have my own complaints about how that file was handled, Master Ledger. I assure you they predate your involvement by 6 years. What I do not yet know is whether you are the man who is finally going to force a resolution, or the man who is about to make an already badly mismanaged case catastrophically worse by treating a divine ledger entry like a guild claims dispute you can bully into settlement. Corin considered her for a long moment. The careful precision, the barely suppressed frustration of a career clergy member who had apparently spent 6 years watching her own institution mishandle a case file and been powerless to close it. The specific quality of someone who had come here not entirely as an adversary, whatever her official mandate said. "Sister Aurelia," he said, "I would like to propose something that I suspect neither of our institutions has a form for. I would like to treat this as a joint file review. You have 6 years of institutional knowledge about the ladies' ledger procedures that I do not have and cannot get anywhere else. I have a certified, demonstrated ability to renegotiate risk outcomes that your temple has apparently never had cause to develop, because gods, in my limited experience so far, do not generally expect to be filed against." He held out a hand, the same gesture he'd offered Ren, offered Bram, offered Marin, the gesture that had, in the space of 1 month, built him the first team of his life that hadn't come from a guild directory. "I am not asking you to violate your mandate. I am asking whether your mandate has room in it for the possibility that 6 years of an unresolved deferral is not sacred order. It's an administrative failure your own temple has been unable to correct from the inside, and I would like your professional help correcting it from the outside, whatever your superiors decide to call the arrangement afterward." Vesper looked at his hand for a long moment, mud settling slowly around both their boots, the flooded valley behind them full of 11 households that were alive today because a disgraced insurance agent had refused to accept that a number was simply what it was. "I have professional objections to you, Master Ledger," she said finally, "that I intend to raise formally, at length, and probably often. I think you are reckless with forces you do not fully understand, and I think your comfort with treating divine accounting as a guild dispute will eventually cost someone more than you're prepared to pay." She did not take his hand yet. "But I have also spent 6 years watching an open file sit uncorrected because everyone above me called it settled when it plainly was not. And I find I am considerably more interested in seeing it actually closed than in maintaining the appearance that my temple never makes an error it can't unmake." A final beat, and then, at last, she took his hand. A brief, businesslike shake, nothing warm in it yet, but nothing hostile either. "Consider this a provisional, adversarial consultation. I reserve the right to object to your methods at any point." "Duly noted," Corin said. "I file objections too, sister. We'll get along fine." That night, alone in the back room after the others had gone to sleep, Corin sat with the day's final notification glowing faint and gold in the dark, reading it for the 4th time, with the particular stillness of a man who has just recognized the shape of something considerably older than his current life. Certification level, Adjuster. Cumulative career total, extended record, level 47. He had been an adjuster, by the system's own count, for less than 1 month. Level 47 was not a number a man earned in a month. It was not, so far as Corin's own memory could account for, a number he had earned at all. He had tracked his experience gains carefully since the day the system first flickered into being over his vision, back when he was 19 and newly hired at the standard desk's lowest filing clerk position, and by his own careful count, cross-referenced against every promotion notification he'd ever received,
he ought to be sitting somewhere in the low 20s, not 47.
Not a number that implied extended record, implied in the specific cold language of a system that had never once in 11 years used an imprecise word where a precise one would do. A career considerably longer than the one he remembered living. He sat with the notification a long time, turning it the way he turned a client's file when the numbers didn't reconcile with the story they'd been told him, searching for the discrepancy that would make the ledger balance again. It did not balance. It had never, he realized now, quite balanced. Not the vague, unexamined sense he'd always had of knowing procedures he'd never been taught. Not the specific, bone-deep familiarity with grief that had let him sit across from 11 years of widows without ever once needing to learn how. Not the dream he still had, perhaps twice a year, of a face he could never quite resolve upon waking, mouthing something urgent at him across a distance he could never close in time. System. Policyholder of record. Inquiry logged. Response pending underwriter authorization. The same non-answer it had always given him for years, whenever he'd been reckless enough to ask who exactly was covering the cost of his own continued existence. But it had never before appended a note like the one that followed, small and grey rather than gold, formatted like a margin comment rather than an official ruling. This is not your first policy term, Agent Ledger. It is your fourth. The prior 3 terms are sealed pending claimant resolution. Continue current performance to petition for unsealing. Corin read it once, then set it very carefully aside, folded his hands the way he folded them for every client who had just been told something that would take consisted considerably longer than one evening to properly absorb. And for the first time since the hearing that had ended his old life, allowed himself to sit in the dark and simply not know what to file it under. Outside, faintly through the thin wall, he could hear Wren's low voice and Bram's gravel-deep answer, the two of them still awake, still arguing amiably about something to do with tomorrow's supply run, the ordinary, unremarkable sound of a team that had existed, by any reasonable accounting, for less than a month, and that Corin found sitting there with a 4-term policy and 3 sealed lifetimes he could not remember living. He was no longer willing to imagine losing. He did not sleep for a long time.